The reason why I will never take my son camping again. When my son Daniel first asked me to take him camping, I was a bit surprised. Until then, he had never really shown any interest in such things. It caught me off guard so much, I jokingly accused him of being an alien. After a moment of laughter, he told me the reason for his sudden interest. He said that his good friend Peter had just returned from a camping trip with his dad and had been telling him about all the fun they had. As I listened to this recounting, I could feel my fatherly instincts beginning to boil. There was nothing on my mind aside from destroying Peter and his dad at their own game. I smiled at Daniel and told him that I would take him camping as soon as I got some free time off work. A few weeks had gone by, and I had taken some time off from my job. During my off hours leading up to my mini vacation, I did my best to research all there was to know about camping. I had only gone camping a couple of times as a child, so all the activities involved had been lost on me. There was no way I would let Daniel or, God forbid, Peter find out. However, during all this, my wife Laura decided to just take a step back and not get involved in our little excursion. I called her a coward for not committing herself to the destruction of Peter's family, but that did little to change her stance on the matter. Eventually, the weekend arrived. That Friday, I picked Daniel up from school and took him home. When we entered through the front door, I watched his eyes light up at all the supplies. I had organized a large tent bag, which rested at his feet. Some sleeping bags leaned against a table, and bags of rations, mostly Esmores and snacks, sat near two fully loaded backpacks. I asked Daniel if he was ready to brave the wilderness with me, and he nodded with stern resolve. Once we loaded up the car, Laura told me with sincerity to be careful. While I often like to joke about situations, I promised her everything would be fine. Daniel and I both hopped into the car and off we went. During my research, I found a couple of locations to camp at. Daniel had told me earlier that Peter and his dad went camping at the lakeside campgrounds, which were the closest to our town. I scoffed at such an obvious location as if I were some campground expert. Our location would be in a forest, nearly 2 hours north of our town. After answering around a million questions and playing I Spy until images started to blur together, we arrived. We pulled off the road onto a winding stretch of coarse dirt that snaked its way through the trees. Our car bounced and rattled the entire time. Another 20 minutes or so passed before we encountered a clearing. We parked the car off to the side, and Daniel looked at me expectantly. I asked him if he was ready, to which he nodded excitedly. We both stepped out of the car, retrieved our backpacks, and hoisted the tent onto my shoulder. We walked a few meters away from the car and began to set up our campsite. After fumbling with the instructions when Daniel wasn't looking, I somehow managed to erect the tent, but despite my best efforts, it still had a slant on one side. We laid out our sleeping bags in the tent, and I told Daniel to find some sticks to get a fire going. While he was off scrounging for kindling, I skirted the tree line for any loose logs I could use. With our resources acquired, I began the tedious process of starting a fire from scratch. After nearly 20 minutes of failing, I walked over to my car and retrieved a lighter. Within a few seconds, the dry brush caught the flame, and a few minutes later, we had a roaring campfire. I took a moment to appreciate the technology before I called Daniel over. We sat together, making Esmores underneath the changing sky as the sun was beginning its descent. Around an hour after dusk, I told Daniel it was time to sleep, and with a yawn, he nodded. I tapped the smoldering fire with my boot a few times, and the embers began to die out as we climbed into the tent and our sleeping bags. Daniel and I listened to the sounds of the forest around us, the chirping of the crickets, the slight rustlings of the leaves in the wind, and the distant howl of some sort of coyote. Before I knew it, my eyelids had shut and I had drifted off. My slumber seemed to last only a few seconds when I felt something nudging my shoulder. I cracked open my tired eyes and looked around. Daniel was sitting next to me, staring at me in the dark. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me that he heard a noise outside of the tent. With my exhaustion getting the better of me, I told him it was probably just an animal and to go back to sleep. As I rolled over to my side and waited for sleep to take me once again, I heard it. It sounded like footsteps, 2 footsteps walking around our camp. If it were some type of animal, there would have been a gait or rhythm to it, but there wasn't. It sounded like a person walking around. They would take 2 steps, then stop. A minute or 2 would pass before I would hear them walk again. I rubbed my tired eyes and sat up in my sleeping bag. Daniel was lying next to me, but still very much awake. With a whisper, I told him I would take a peek out of the tent to make sure there was nothing there. He returned a slight nod, and I leaned forward. I quietly tugged at the small zipper and peeled it away slowly so as not to make a lot of noise. With the newly formed hole, I brought my eye up to it and looked around. With how dark it was outside and the long extinguished campfire, it was nearly impossible to see anything of note. Still, I scanned around carefully, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever had been making that noise. I thought I spotted something moving near the trees, but after blinking my eyes, it was gone. I turned back to Daniel, who was now sitting up and looking at me quietly. I told him there was nothing to worry about and that we should just go back to sleep. As we both lay back down, I heard something that made my hair stand on end, the snapping of a twig directly on the other side of the tent where our heads were resting. I quietly sat back up and retrieved my flashlight from my bag. Slowly, I unzipped the tent and crawled outside. Standing up outside of the tent, I felt a chill from the cold night air wrap around me. I shivered a bit before focusing on my goal. I turned towards where I had heard the noise and switched on my flashlight. The beam of light punctured the darkness, and at first, I saw nothing of note, just the grass and the outline of trees in the distance. Then, it stood up on the other side of the tent. This figure towered above our small tent and, despite me looking directly at it, I couldn't believe that I was seeing it. It was human-like in appearance, with limbs longer than its torso jutting out from the shoulders and hips of its body. Its skin seemed smooth, though it was hard to tell with the amount of dirt covering its body. Its head was nightmarish and massive. It had huge eyes that were set deep into its skull. The eyes themselves were black, but when I shined my light on them, 2 pinpoints of light within the dark eyes reflected at me. Its mouth seemed to stretch across the entirety of its face, like an exaggerated grin. My flashlight shook rapidly in my hand, and I was shivering once again, but this time not from the cold. After a moment passed, I heard a noise that made my heart sink to my stomach. Daniel called out to me, asking if I could see anything. When his tiny voice carried out from the tent, this thing before me twitched and turned its attention to my son's voice, who was still inside of the tent. It seemed like it was drawn to the sound of my son's voice. Its face angled down towards the nylon material. Its smiling mouth began to widen, then its lower jaw dropped nearly a foot long. A row of thin, razor-sharp teeth lined the top and bottom of its mouth. It raised its unnaturally long arm high up into the air, and I realized then what it was going to do. My body reacted on its own, and I reached my hands inside the tent, grabbing onto Daniel, and I pulled as hard as I could. Daniel and I came crashing to the ground as this thing assaulted and tore through our tent. During the onslaught, I helped Daniel by placing my hand over his mouth as his tears began to coat my hand. We stared silently as this thing eviscerated our tent. During this, one of our bags had been sent flying towards us, crashing right next to me. Realizing it was my bag, I reached over and felt through the pockets before finding my car keys. I whispered into Daniel's ear that when I gave the signal to run for the car as fast as he could, despite his distress, he nodded. A few moments after the creature started attacking our tent, a noise drew its attention off into the woods. It turned towards the sound, and that's when I told Daniel to run. We both rose to our feet and dashed towards our car. A deafening shriek filled the air behind us as we ran. Right before we made it, I rapidly clicked the unlock button, and we both entered the car, slamming and locking the doors behind us. I started the car, and when the lights came on, that thing was standing directly before us, an angry grin plastered across its elongated face. I threw the car into reverse, and we backed out of there. I spun the car around in the soft dirt, and we drove the trail back onto the main road, trying desperately not to crash in the process. We didn't stop driving until we made it home. The entire drive, Daniel didn't say a word. He just sobbed quietly in his seat while I struggled not to do the same. Since that day, I've decided to never take my son camping again. My camping trip did not go as expected. Hello, my name is John. I'm 19. I'm a hard-working man, and my dream is to one day start my own business. I've always been interested in exploring the world, and I wish to start a camping business by the end of the year. It is currently the 8th of September. I've saved up a lot of money, and I am preparing to fund my business and pitch my ideas to more popular businesses which might be interested in helping me. However, I still feel like I'm unwise and I am missing something in terms of knowledge, and that's when I got an idea. I haven't gone camping in at least 3 years, and I should probably go along with a popular camping company to get inspiration for my business. I called up 2 of my friends, Alex and George, and they both agreed to come with me, and we were gonna have a blast. We booked tickets online and drove over to the company. We entered the grounds and we saw our bus. We were almost late, so we rushed to the bus to make it in time. We get in and now we are on our way. About 3 hours later we are in the woods. It's currently 7 p.m. and our guide Alice is showing us the path to the camping grounds. We arrived and it looked wonderful, with plenty of tents and a big campfire in the middle. We were gonna explore all the different wildlife in the forest, the species of plants, and cook marshmallows. Everything is going well, but for some reason, I feel uneasy, as if I'm being watched or that it isn't only us here. I've been out camping plenty of times and have been in different forests plenty of times, but never once have I felt as uncomfortable as now. The forest just feels desolate and lost or abandoned. It gave me the creeps, but with my 2 friends around I decided to brush it off. We sat down around the campfire and Alice was giving us a small list of rules we had to follow, 3 to be exact. 1. Never leave the tents after 11 p.m. 2. Never go exploring the forest alone. And 3. If you happen to be outside the tents at 11 p.m. and you notice anything weird or unnerving, run towards it. She said with passion the rules were a bit strange, but I could understand the first 2 as the forest can be dangerous with wildlife out there. However, the 3rd rule gave me goosebumps. It's an unnatural rule I haven't heard of before, but maybe I'm just paranoid, so I try to ignore it. It's currently 8 p.m. My 2 friends decide to go exploring. Alice had given us a map to find our way back in case we got lost. We begin wandering around a bit and see plenty of different species of plants, and we see wolves, although from afar as to not be noticed. This forest was filled with so many different flowers and species of plants and animals it almost seemed unreal or fake, too good to be true. It's so beautiful, but it seems so unnerving for some reason because of how unnatural it looks. George tells me he found something big. We go to see what it is, and we see a tree which is huge, definitely bigger than the current biggest known tree. This tree reached miles into the air. We couldn't even see the leaves. It's beautiful, but so weird I don't like it. Alex and George seem very mesmerized, but I'm not buying it. Something seems off, but I'll ignore it for now. I don't believe in the supernatural anyways. I realize it's gotten dark, and I check the time to see it's already 10 p.m., although it didn't even feel like we were gone for more than 30 minutes, but I just narrowed it down to be my perception of time as we had a lot of fun. We were a bit nervous, unsure if we could get back to the tents before 11 p.m. We felt like we had wandered very far. We followed the map and noticed it was only a minute from 11 p.m. So we ran as fast as we could, but we're still a bit far from the tents. It is now 11:05 p.m. and we finally reached the tents on the map. But as we arrive, my stomach drops. The tents, they're gone. We were sure we had gone the right way, so we were very scared. We kept following the map and we kept ending up in the same place. We were going the right way. So what was going on? Did Alice give us the wrong map? I said to myself. My friends are now very horrified. We're lost in a forest that is seemingly unending and we don't know what to do. We decided we would run far in one direction to hopefully come out of the forest. We're low on food and drinks and we're getting exhausted. So we decide to sit down and take a break. We brainstormed ideas and decided to call 911. However, to our surprise, our phones were dead. We're now completely lost in the forest. Alex is crying and George is wondering what we did wrong. Me personally, I'm still in shock. I knew something was wrong the second we arrived. Suddenly, a large gust of wind hits us, seemingly out of nowhere. We look in the direction it came from and notice a set of eyes staring at us. We couldn't make out its body. Filled with fear and adrenaline, we run away, completely ignoring the third rule. After running for a while, we notice the eyes are now in every direction. We decide to try and run past the eyes, and we manage to go away. However, as I look back, my heart stops for a second. George is gone, just like that. We decide to call for him as maybe he got lost from the group, but no response. We now notice the eyes again. We don't know what to do, and we decide to just try and ignore them and go to sleep. However, that was a huge mistake. I closed my eyes for just a minute and opened them again to see if anything changed. I turned pale, and Alex was gone too. Now I'm completely alone and don't know what to do. I keep running and running, hiding and trying to sleep, but I simply can't. I look at my watch and notice horrifyingly, the time hasn't changed at all. I run and run, and eventually, I'm completely exhausted. I sit down and accept my fate. As the eyes continue looking at me, I start to grow mad. I'm losing my mind and punching trees and hitting my head on rocks. Time isn't changing and I'm starving and thirsty. I lose my mind and I decide to climb the tree next to me and hop off, killing myself. To my shock, I woke up next to the huge tree. I was met by a sigh of relief and saw both my friends alive and well next to me. Supposedly they didn't know anything that just happened and told me I had simply fallen asleep. I'm satisfied and happy it was just a nightmare. We decide to go back to the tents, but then we saw it. The tents are gone again. I realized the undeniable truth. I'm in a loop. I will never go camping again. I will never go camping again, and I think I might even move as far away from this place as possible. I went on a camping trip with my mates a couple of weeks ago, and I will never step foot in that forest again. We and my friends planned a camping trip. Not a hunting trip or anything, but two of my friends brought their hunting rifles and planned to go hunting for a couple of hours if they got the chance. I'd always wanted to hunt, but I'd never had the time to do a decent length trip. When I told one of my hunting friends this, he told me he said he'd bring his crappy old hunting rifle for me. We didn't set up camp till about 6 p.m. I and 3 of my friends were ready to eat and go to bed. My 2 hunting friends said they would eat and go out hunting. We ate, and by about 7 p.m. we were tidying up and setting up sleeping bags. We had a 7-man tent, and there were 5 of us, so there was lots of space. I decided to stay in and go hunting the next time they went out. My 2 hunting friends went out, and I and my 2 other mates stayed in the tent and talked for about 2 hours before going to sleep. As we were falling asleep, we heard sprinting footsteps coming towards us. We all shot up and jumped out of our sleeping bags. Guys, it was one of our friends who went out. Open the tent. I unzipped the tent and they practically dove in. They gulped down some water and breathed hard before getting words out. We finished shooting as it got dark, started one of my friends. John had just packed up his rifle and I was having a last scout to see if I could see anything, and I saw a deer. It had glowing red eyes, staring right down my scope. I shot and nothing happened. Then it just ran at us, so Leggett had described my friend in a panic. John, did you see it too? I asked John. I didn't see it until it started running at us. I didn't see a deer form, just the red eyes coming towards us, he replied. I left my rifle there. We'll have to go back for it tomorrow, said my other friend. We'll all go back tomorrow, said one of my friends who stayed in the tent. We managed to sleep in the end, and the next morning we started walking to where they went hunting. We found my friend's rifle in one piece. He picked it up and unloaded it. Thank Christ, he said, putting the unused bullets in his pocket. What he didn't notice was an engraving in the butt. Look at the butt, I said. My friend held the rifle out and looked at the butt. It was a carving of 2 people. One standing up with a rifle bag on his back, and one lying down still looking down at his rifle scope. That's us, said John. What? Replied my other hunting friend. I can only imagine that's what we would have looked like at about 1 p.m. John suggested we go hunting before sunset so we're a little less on edge. We did about an hour's hunting before coming back and spending the rest of the day and night with our friends. We had a fun night of drinking and talking before going to sleep. Our plans for the next day were to have breakfast, pack up our things in the tent, and eat lunch in the forest, depending on the time we left. If we were ready too early, we'd stop somewhere on the way home. We had our tent packed up and ready to go. It was 11:30 a.m. and we were all ready. We decided to stop somewhere on the way home to get something to eat. We began our 1-hour walk to the car. We were about halfway to the car when we heard a man scream in the distance. No further than 100 meters into the brush. We all stopped dead. I said we needed to go check it out, and both my hunting friends agreed. I was given the crappy hunting rifle, and we ran forward toward the scream. We reached roughly where the scream came from. There were bloody, torn clothes everywhere, but nothing else. I picked up the clothes and looked at them. We were completely spooked. I told my friends I couldn't see anything else, and neither could they. Suddenly, we heard the very recognizable sound of our 2 other friends screaming. We sprinted back, shouting and crying their names, doing our best to not trip up. We made it back to the path. Our bags were strewn about everywhere. Our friends were gone. We looked around and couldn't see anything. Nobody. We came back to the bags. We were all near tears. We sat down for about 5 minutes, trying to think about what to do. Again, I heard one of my disappeared friends screaming towards where we had set up camp. My eyes shot towards it. The first thing I saw was a pair of red eyes bolting directly at me. It was only a second later I realized it was a deer with red eyes. Me and my 2 friends bolted to the car. After about 5 minutes, it seemed to have disappeared. We got to the car and went back to my house to stay there for the rest of the day and the night. We reported our friends missing and the bloody torn clothes to the police. They haven't been found. I'm beginning to think they won't be. We also told them about the deer with red eyes. They had no idea what we were talking about and said they had never had reports about it, but there was a rapidly rising number of missing reports in that forest. I will never go camping ever again. Hello everyone, I am currently writing this in my house with bars on my windows and heavy locks on my door. Why? Well, the experience I had a few months ago has changed my life forever. It was a regular day our classes were done for the summer. I figured that a way to celebrate is to go camping with my friends. So I did. I invited my friends Evan, Robert, Jenna, and Leah. Me and Evan planned this along the way during the school year. We settled on this campsite that had great reviews online. It looked like a popular area judging by the reviews. So we all agreed to go to this area. School finished. I got my week off from work because I saved the days on my paid vacation. I picked up my friends with my pickup truck and drove. I had a weird feeling while I was driving. I couldn't describe the feeling. I was sensing something was gonna happen. We got to the campsite and there were no cars anywhere. We thought it was just a slow time. I parked my truck, got our camping gear, and settled in. We set up our tents and then had a campfire. There was a lot of noise out, which is typical for the great outdoors. We got some food we brought home. We sat and talked about life and how we were glad classes were done for the summer. For some reason, I kept looking back a lot, having a weird feeling something or someone was watching us. I took a walk through the woods and heard a weird noise coming from the right side of me. My instincts told me to turn back, which I did. I was thinking it was some animal who felt threatened. I walked back to our campsite. By then we were finishing up eating, and we continued to talk, even smoking our cigarettes. Having fun getting a few drinks. We weren't drunk but tipsy. The sun was going down. We decided it was time for bed, so we got 2 two-person tents and 1-person tents. It was starting to get very quiet. It was too quiet. I couldn't sleep. As I finally settled in my sleeping bag, I hear a foot stomp 2 inches away from our tent. There was large breathing. I was shocked and scared. I didn't know what to do. I woke up Evan. I told him, and he was scared as well. The creature moved to the 1-person tent. He grabbed it and threw it like it was nothing. Robert was screaming in pain, then the creature took him. My fighter's response got to me, and I stormed out of the tent and woke up Jenna and Leah. I got them out, and right before we were about to leave, this creature was right in front of us. I can't describe it, but I'll try. It had a mammoth-like face. It had a human-like body, 8 feet tall. Razor's sharp claws. Leah screamed and it got her. Snagged her to the woods. The screaming stopped. I truly wanted to save her. But we had nothing to defend ourselves with. We ran out of the woods, threw our gear in the back, and before I started my truck, I saw the creature running behind our truck. I floored my truck. I didn't stop speeding until we got home. I called the police. We reported a wild animal tore up our campsite and attacked our friends. They asked our campsite name and we said Hambridge Park. The operator told me they sent officers to the area. When we got home, we told the parents of Robert and Leo what happened. They were devastated. I can't blame them. I am truly traumatized from this experience. I used to love the outdoors, but now I'm too afraid to leave my house. I haven't been sleeping and having nightmares of that creature coming and attacking me. I got a call from the police station the other day. They told me to come in for questions. I went to the police station and the detective talked to me. What he told me I couldn't believe. He asked me if I went to Camp Bayview Park. I told him no, I went to Hambridge. The detective said, well, that Lark is Bayview Park. Someone made a fake sign and replaced it. We think some kid put it there as a joke. He explained the park closed down years ago because there were hundreds of missing people, but they never found them. They went to the area and found an arm which was identified as Robert. They haven't found Leah's body yet. I showed the website and sent it to the detective for evidence. I thanked him and went home. I have been home for 2 weeks now, and I am scared to leave my apartment. I swear I hear strange noises on quiet nights outside my window. So this is a warning: if you see a campsite with no one there, turn back before it's too late. You might not be lucky enough to come back alive. The camping trip. You and your family decide that you're all going to take a camping trip out in the woods since the summer weather was nice and sunny. You all packed your bags with necessities, as well as some entertainment such as books and decks of cards, since there wasn't going to be cell service for miles at the site. You or your family start heading over to the camping site. Once you all arrive at the campsite, you and your father start setting up the tents while your mother and sibling go out to search for sticks and branches for a campfire before it starts getting dark. Around 2 hours later, your mom and sibling come back with plenty of firewood just as you and your father finished pitching the final tent. You all brought ingredients for s'mores, and after it gets dark enough, you all gather around the campfire, roasting marshmallows for s'mores and telling scary campfire stories. After a few hours of laughs and s'mores, you notice that you have to go to the bathroom. You wander away from the campsite a little bit so you can have some privacy while you go. After you're done, you notice that there's a figure crouching behind some trees. You thought it was your sibling trying to scare you, so you flip them off and start walking back to the campsite. As you're walking back, you can feel a few droplets of rain on your face. That's weird. The news wasn't expecting any rain in the forecast, but you shrug it off. As you make it back to the campsite, the following conversation ensues. You, hey, sibling's name, you suck at scaring people, you moron. Sibling, what are you talking about? You, I saw you hiding behind some trees trying to scare me while I was going to the bathroom. Sibling, I never left the campsite. I have no idea what you're talking about. Your heart sinks as you hear what your sibling said. If that wasn't your sibling, then who was it? You tell your parents what you saw, and your father takes his shotgun and runs out in the direction of the woods, trying to track down whoever it was stalking you in the darkness. You, your mom, and your sibling all huddle together in one of the tents in fear as you all wait for your father to come back. Then you hear your father shouting at someone while firing his shotgun. It sounds like he was firing a warning shot to tell the stranger to go away or they would pay. Then you hear a few more shots. You remember how much ammo your father packed, and he used the last of it to try to shoot the stranger. You then hear the manic screams of pain coming from your father as it sounds like the stranger has done something to him. Then your father goes silent. His screams stopped abruptly as if he had been cut off. You become terrified as your mother and siblings start crying and shaking from fear. The rain starts to pour down in torrents, extinguishing the campfire, your only source of light. The wind came very powerful, and it blew away all of your tents, so now none of you have any kind of shelter from the rain and whoever was out in the woods. Your mother suddenly, in a fit of rage, sprints out into the woods to find the stranger and try to avenge your father's assumed death. Then you and your sibling can hear your mother's screams as she also seems to have been killed. Now you and your sibling are terrified. You both run as fast as you can to the car. You both get in and you try to start it, but the car won't start. You look at the gas meter and the needle is at E. The car is empty of gas. You lock the car doors and you both just sit there, hoping to see your mother, your father, or both come running out of the woods for you. You both do see someone coming out of the woods, but it isn't your mother or your father. It's the stranger, and he's covered in blood, and he is dragging your parents' dead bodies behind him. Now it was official, he had killed both of your parents. You and your sibling try to stay as silent as you possibly could, but your hand accidentally slips and the car horn echoes throughout the thicket. The stranger heard the horn and noticed you two sitting in the car. He starts sprinting toward you with a psychopathic look on his face, with wide eyes and a sick, twisted smile. You and your sibling can only scream and cry while holding each other tight as you both watch in horror as the stranger smashes the windshield in and starts crawling into the car, with a huge bloody hunting knife in his hand. I'm never going camping again. The thought of camping always amused me, sitting by the fire at night and talking with your friends, grilling marshmallows and drinking, all while being out in nature. Something about it seemed so peaceful. I shared my thoughts with a couple of close friends, and they were all very positive about the idea. We decided to make it happen and drove out to the woods the next weekend. Ashley, Sarah, Peter, Malcolm, and I were all excited and had packed the car with supplies for the coming 3 days. It really was as fun as I imagined, and during our first night, we stayed up until almost 3 a.m. The second day was when things started going wrong. I woke up at around 6 a.m., which, considering the circumstances, wasn't especially weird. The thing that startled me though was the silence, the complete and unreal silence. It felt like I had gone deaf. I couldn't hear anything. No wind, trees rustling, or my friends breathing. I felt a paralyzing fear and didn't dare to move, but shook it off as to being in the woods. I mean, the woods really can play tricks on your mind. I must have fallen back asleep because I woke up from Sarah looking down on me. just a couple of inches from my face. I nearly screamed and asked her what the hell she was doing, but she just laughed it off. Apart from that, the day continued on as normal. It was actually really fun. When it got late in the evening and Ashley both had to pee, one of the less fun things to do while camping, so we walked away together to find a suitable place. The darkness surrounded us and I really had to concentrate on where to put my feet so I didn't trip over some roots. Ashley suddenly screamed and I nearly ran to her to find out what had happened. She looked mortified and stared at something on the ground while holding something in her hand. I focused my eyes on the thing she looked at, and when my eyes had adjusted to the darkness, I saw the outlines. The outlines of bones. Human bones. I screamed as well, a scream of pure horror, and looked up at Ashley. In her hand she held one of the bones. But what I looked up at wasn't Ashley. Her face had morphed into something that didn't look human. Her cheeks had sunken into her face, and she looked lifeless, pale, and dull. She opened her mouth, and a scream higher than any human should be able to make escaped from her. I froze and just stared at her, convinced I was dreaming. She fell down to the ground and started to shake uncontrollably. I screamed for Sarah, Peter, and Malcolm, and they all came running. Ashley had stopped moving and rested lifeless on the ground. Sarah screamed at me, demanding to know what had happened. Everything was chaos. It wasn't easy, but we all managed to calm down a bit, just so we could gather ourselves and actually talk about what just happened. We inspected Ashley's body, and that was when I noticed it. Her right hand was badly burned, with redness and blisters on it. It was such a contrast to the rest of her now pale body that it was impossible to miss. I connected the dots. That's the hand she was holding the bone with. That was it for me. I wanted to leave right that second. We left as soon as we managed to, leaving Ashley and almost all of our stuff behind. I sat quietly in the car and stared out of the window. I heard Malcolm breathing excessively behind me in the back seat, and I turned around, thinking he was stressed. His eyes were wide open and he stared down at his hands. He claimed he felt funny and started breathing even faster. I looked down at his lap, where his hands rested. A bone. A human bone rested in his hands. Seemingly a rib. My blood turned to ice and I acted on instinct. I slapped the bone out of his hands and it flew out of the open car window. I then swore to myself that I never would return here. We came home about 10 minutes ago. I'm relieved that I'm home, but I can't help but think I really miss those woods. I think I might go back tonight. Camping trip. Real events. In the summer of 2022, me and some friends went to Alaska for a camping trip due to our school doing a camping trip for the graduates. Only 10 kids went, but YK, it's a camping trip? So our school took everyone that was going to Alaska on June 2nd. The day we got out of school basically, we boarded a flight for about 5 hours. When everyone got off the plane, we got our stuff and went on a bus to the camping site. Everyone fell asleep except for me and one of my friends, and of course the bus driver. This is where it gets scary. I and my friend were scrolling on TikTok and Instagram just waiting for the ride to be over, and we lost service, so we put our phones away and just started talking to each other. We started looking outside and kept in mind the trail we were on was very isolated. So when my and said friend looked out the window, we saw a car passing by, We did not think anything of it due to it just being Alaska and people like camping. The car was like a reddish car, kinda like an old-looking Mustang. When we got to the campsite after 2 to 3 hours of just being on the bus, we all got out and stretched and used the bathroom. I and my friend were the first in the bathroom, and there was a strange lady just standing there. We were creeped out a bit, but we thought it was just one of the adults from the school watching to make sure we didn't do anything LOL. So we finally get to where everyone is camping. There were 2 groups of 5, the students who attended, and the third group was all the teachers. So the students set up their tents with the teachers' help, and the teachers set theirs up. So we do the things you see in movies, read scary stories, eat s'mores, the basic shit. Then around 11 p.m. I would say, everyone got in their tents and started to doze off. Eventually, I was the only one awake because I had trouble sleeping on command, and I just decided to stay up. I regretted it. Around 1 in the morning you could hear rustling, not like people moving around, but like scratching and hard breathing. I didn't know what it was, so I went out and saw that same car we saw on the isolated road. I got kinda creeped out, so I went to turn around and I saw the same lady I had seen in the bathroom when we got off the bus earlier. That night I was too scared to even move, and I stayed up till sunrise. I and my friends group went out to explore, and we got to split up into a group of 3 and a group of 2. I was with my best friend, and the group of 3 left in another direction. So we were walking and we stopped at a lake because we noticed something in the distance. We thought it was nothing, but when we looked harder and got a bit closer, we realized it was the girl from the bathroom. We got a bit scared, so we started to head back and called for the rest of the people in the group, but that same girl started following us, and she got closer and closer every time we looked back at her. So when it was time to eat lunch, around 2 p.m. we told the teachers and supervisors in private not to scare anyone, but they didn't believe us, so we had to deal with it for the rest of the trip. It was a week long. Then when we got on the bus at the end of the trip, after we kept seeing that same girl every day, we thought we were okay. But when we were driving back to the airport, we saw the same red car. She finally stopped chasing us after we got to the airport, but then a week later we got an email from the teachers saying someone was arrested at the site for stalking people and terrorizing campers. This is still scary to me, and I don't think I ever want to go back to the campsite. My friend and I heard the last sounds of a person's life while camping. I've never been much of an outdoor person, but the summer after my second year in college, one of my roommates convinced me to go tent camping with him. It was only over the weekend, and I wasn't doing anything anyway, so I said I'd go with him. For the sake of privacy, I'll call him Jake. Now, Jake would go all out. He had a 2014 Jeep Wrangler, the entire back seat filled almost completely with different camping gear. He didn't like to reserve spots at actual campsites, but instead found his own spots, which he said made it more fun. We drove up into the Rocky Mountains for a while until we found a break in the trees with enough space to fit the Jeep through. We then drove off-road between trees until he pointed out a good spot. We set up a fire pit, chairs, and the tent we'd be staying in for the night. It was already around 7 p.m., and the sun was starting to set. Jake went to the car and pulled out a bag of hot dogs for us to cook over the fire. Real original, I know, but they were an easy meal, and Jake wanted to give me the true camping experience since it was my first time. He even brought stuff for s'mores, although we never got that far. As we were cooking the hot dogs, there was an extremely loud female screaming, maybe 300 or 400 feet away. I looked up and saw Jake's head turn towards the direction of the screams. At first, there weren't any words we could make out, but then there was a help a please and a no, all of them sounding more desperate than the last. Then, the loudest, most terrifying scream was abruptly cut off mid-scream, instant silence. Jake looked back in my direction. The look on his face was pure horror. As far as we knew, the closest man-made structure was the road, and even that was far away. No one should have been out here. Whatever it was that we just heard didn't matter. We knew we needed to leave as fast as possible. We started frantically throwing things in the back of the Jeep, stuffed the still fully made tent inside, and as we closed the door, I tried calling 911 as we started driving back to the road. I had practically no service out there, but somehow managed to get on the line with an operator. I did my best to explain what we heard, and they said they'd send out a trooper as soon as possible. It took us twice as long to get back to the road just because this time we couldn't see anything. Finally, we saw the pavement and stopped for a second. We didn't know if we should wait for the cops or not. That's when we saw a figure walking out from the trees in front of us. He was wearing jeans with an all-black sweatshirt with a hood covering his face. He was dragging something behind him in a heavy sheet or some kind of bag. His head was down, limping as he walked. He looked over in our direction when blue and red police lights revealed themselves down the road. The man turned his head and started sprinting back into the forest, letting go of the bag. The police saw this and started chasing after him. The bag he was dragging turned out to contain the remains of a 34-year-old woman. We aren't sure if the man was ever caught, but one thing is certain, I'll probably never go camping again. Never going camping again. When I was 15, our family decided one winter we should go camping, and in Arizona, winters weren't piercing cold, so we drove up into the mountains, and while I wasn't on board with camping, I was forced to go. But once we were in this dark, empty forest, only things in sight were tall, dry trees and slight frost along the tips of the grass. I was bored that night and wanted to explore a little while my family was setting up the tents. So I dove into the dark depths of the night. A chilling wind whispered through the trees, sending shivers down my spine, and obviously, I was scared who wouldn't be, but my foolish self decided to continue as the moon hung like a cold, pale eye in the sky, casting eerie shadows that danced across the ground. I found myself drawn to the dilapidated house at the end of this long hallway made of trees, a place that gave off horrible feelings. Curiosity gnawed at me, propelling me toward the decaying front door. The wood creaked under my weight as I pushed it open, revealing a hallway cloaked in darkness. The air was thick with a musty scent, like decay and time itself. I flicked on my flashlight, its beam cutting through the blackness, revealing walls covered in peeling wallpaper. As I ventured deeper into the house, the floorboards groaned beneath my footsteps, as if protesting my intrusion. The hallway led me to a door, half ajar, revealing a room bathed in a sickly red glow. My heart raced as I stepped inside, my breath catching in my throat at the sight before me. Candles lined the room, casting flickering shadows that danced upon the walls. In the center of the room lay a gruesome tableau, a body, torn apart in the most horrifying way imaginable. Blood stained the floor, forming gruesome patterns that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The stench was overwhelming, a sickly sweet mixture of iron and decay that threatened to make me gag. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the macabre sight, limbs twisted at unnatural angles, viscera strewn across the floor like some twisted work of art. The walls themselves seemed to ooze with dread, as if the very essence of the room had been tainted by the violence that had occurred here. A low, guttural sound echoed from the shadows, and I spun around, my flashlight beam revealing nothing but darkness. My heart pounded in my chest, a primal fear taking hold of me as I realized I was not alone. Something was lurking in the corners, something that reveled in the pain and suffering that had taken place here. A whisper brushed against my ear, icy fingers trailing down my spine. My breath hitched as the words seeped into my mind, a litany of horrors, a symphony of despair. Panic clawed at me, urging me to flee, but my feet felt rooted to the blood-soaked floor. At that moment, I knew that I had stumbled upon something beyond comprehension, a darkness that defied the boundaries of our world. As the room seemed to close in around me, I realized that the horrors of the house were not confined to its decaying walls. They had taken root in my very soul, forever binding me to the malevolent presence that hungered for more. I went to therapy for months after that night and still have nightmares and visions that bring me back to that horrid house. And even years later, I have no idea what went down there. Camping trip at Riverview Park. The following is our current accumulation of evidence referring to the incident at Riverview Park last December. It's assumed that 4 campers were on the scene the night of the massacre. 3 have been recovered, but 1 is still missing. There have been rumors the park is seeing activity again for the first time since police stopped patrolling the area. Take this as a kind of promotion. I want you to be the lead man on this reorganization. Can't have anyone near the campgrounds. My police chief said. What the fuck? I told you I wanted my computer job back. I've got too much PTSD from this shit, man. I begged. Well, if you intend on keeping a roof above your head, get to the fucking camp or I will fire you and leave you broke and lame. The chief insisted. Fuck you, saggy tits, I said as I stormed out of the room. So me and this complete whack job are in my cruiser. We used to do jobs together, and we're about 3 minutes out from the location. Hey man, you ever go to this place before? Asked my assistant. Yeah. I tried not to make a face while thinking about the shredded, ripped-apart human corpses lining the walls of the trailers in the campground. Did you kill anyone? Said the cop. Shut the fuck up or you'll steer into oncoming traffic, I replied calmly. We arrived at the grounds. Desolate. A cool autumn breeze washes us over. I push my fingers through my hair and light a cigarette at my lips. This place brings me back to a time when things were different. Hey pal, did you know who those 3 kids who died and got mutilated were? I asked. Nah man, tough luck, am I right? I found my daughter here that day, skinned and ripped to pieces, hanging all around the trailer like fucking Christmas streamers. I described. Oh, damn man. Yeah. Sheesh. Replied the bewildered kid. With that, we entered the foggy dark park. It smells like football season out here. Just as we approached the place where the massacre happened, we saw smoke coming from a clearing ahead. I grabbed the kid and we went into the woods next to the trail. We saw a campfire. 10 people standing around it and looking straight up into the night sky. They were groaning and moaning and making weird noises. Just like that, I snapped. I removed the gun from my waist and approached the campfire. I placed the gun against one of the seemingly young cult-goers' heads and executed them. People stopped chanting and ran in all directions. I aimed my pistol and shot a couple of them down. I dragged one of them over the campfire and forced them to burn. My co-cop appeared behind me, gun aimed at my head. "Fucking do it, pussy." I screamed. Blood splattered on my face, and the smell of flesh burning filled the air. The cop put his gun down, so I shot him until I ran out of ammo. I then took all of my clothes off and stepped into the fire with the burning body. Every cell in my body cried with stinging pain as I stared up into the night sky. My scary camping trip. When I was 12, me and my family went camping. Once we got to the camp, we noticed that it smelled really bad. We had already paid to camp there, so we just had to face it. My cousin and I really liked to adventure away from camp. We were camping in a mountain. I can't quite remember what mountain. We went quite far from camp and it was starting to get late, so we decided to head back. We were talking to each other about school or something like that. That's when we saw a branch break out of absolutely nowhere. It wasn't a stick, it was a full-on branch. We thought that it could have been really old and it just decided to fall. We didn't really think much of it, even though we should have. At this point, we're about 10 minutes away from camp and it was around 6:30 p.m., so we kinda picked up the pace. Speed walking, we saw a dark figure walking beside us going the opposite way. The thing is, this dark figure was really tall. It only had one leg. We started running because we had no idea what it was. Once we got back to camp, we told the parents what had happened. Obviously, they didn't believe us. We went and set up our tent talking about what we had seen. We wanted to know more about this figure, so we decided that in the morning we would go back to where we were and see if we could find it again. It was around 2 a.m. and we both heard scratching on the tent. We saw a finger-like thing going around the tent very slowly. We looked at each other and turned on a lamp we had. We looked around the tent with the lamp and there was nothing there. We both had heard it, so we screamed. The parents ran to our tent, seeing us both in fear. Asking what was wrong, we told them about the scratching. Now they were kind of believing us because of the figure we had seen the other day. Me and my cousin slept with my parents in their tent. In the morning, we were gonna go for a race ride. We ate and started putting our helmets on. We rode with his parents because they had a 4-seater. We went on this trail that it seemed to be faded, like no one had ridden there for a while. We had noticed that this was the way the figure had been walking. We were both very scared and sketched out about it. The smell was awful and started smelling like a rotten body of some sort. My family likes to explore and go off trails. We went this one way and started to see stuff that had been recently used and or put there. We saw a shed-like thing and wanted to go check it out. My auntie cousin had a very bad feeling about this shed. My older cousin and uncle went inside. They looked around screaming when they came out. They said they had seen a dead animal with its origins everywhere. We went back to camp, packed up, and left. Camping Trip Horror Story. Chapter 1. Camping Trip. This story happened to me in early 2018. My friend Matthew asked if I wanted to go camping on Friday. I had nothing to do on the weekend, so I said sure. When Friday finally came, Matthew's mom drove us to the forest and we set up the 2 tents. The campfire was about to burn out, so me and Matthew decided to get some sticks. Chapter 2. Ghost of the Forest. While collecting sticks, Matthew ran away screaming. I was confused, so I chased after him. We managed to get back to the camp and his mom asked, "Why were you screaming?" Matthew claimed he saw a ghost lady wearing a black dress, had really pale skin and red eyes. I didn't believe him because I didn't see the ghost, and Matthew's mom said, "This is why I told you not to play these stupid horror games." Now look what happened. Luckily, I managed to grab enough sticks for the campfire, so we immediately forgot about the ghost situation and started roasting marshmallows. Chapter 3. Forest Nightmare. After we ran out of marshmallows, we decided to call it a night and sleep, but while sleeping I had this dream where I was in the same forest, but it was covered in snow. After looking around for a bit, I saw the same ghost Matthew had seen, so I ran around trying to avoid the ghost, and after running for a long time I slipped on what looked like a frozen lake and something caught my eye, but I couldn't tell what it was. I went closer to the ice making sure I wouldn't slip, and after getting a closer look I saw a garbage bag. I was confused, but then I woke up. Chapter 4. Ghost in a Bag. I woke up really early, about 5 a.m. or 6 a.m., and Matthew and his mom were still asleep. I was thirsty, so I decided to go to the lake nearby to drink some water, but I saw a garbage bag washed by the shore of the lake. I was confused, so I decided to check what it was, but it smelled horrible. I opened it anyway, and I found a mutilated body and a severed head of what looked like the ghost in my dream. I ran back to the camp and told Matthew's mom about it. Chapter 5. The Horrible Truth. We went back to Matthew's house and we called the police. They arrived quickly and we showed them the garbage bag and they managed to arrest the killer. Turns out the ghost's real name is Lucy and she was happily married to her killer, but it wasn't happy for long. Lucy suffered through domestic violence and one night her husband accidentally killed her. The scumbag didn't want to go to jail, so he cut her body up, put the remains in a garbage bag, and dumped it in the lake.